Welcome, everybody. I have with me today Andy Talaga, and we are going to talk about Japanese cards. And before I let Andy take it away, I'm just going to go on a bit of my own experience with Japanese cards, which I think is similar to many other players. Is my first encounter with the Japanese cards was in Reflections 2, right? They were just an extra card that were in Reflections 2 that I put in my binder, and I didn't really understand what was rare. I think even today I pinged Andy, I got a couple of Japanese cards. I was like, wait, is this a New Hope card? Because I wasn't tracking it. So that was my first experience with the Japanese cards, and really all I thought about it for 20 years. And today I want to delve a little bit deeper into the three Japanese sets. And Andy is really the master of all this stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to him shortly. But just a quick shameless plug. If you guys like the content, just please, like and subscribe. That's how YouTube, rewards folks and to keeps it in the algorithm. We grow the community and the game. So Andy, can you just drop the information? Just start at the beginning. What do we need to know about Japanese cards?
Sure. So Japanese cards originally came out in Japan. Premiere was the first set, like with regular Star Wars, that launched in April of 1997.
So this is 2 years after the original premiere
came out.
Okay.
Which we'll circle back to that in a second. A New Hope came out a little bit later that year, like maybe September, October of 1997. And then Hoth was released in March or April of 1998. Those are really the only three sets that came out. There was the two-player sets that had Japanese printings. They came out roughly around the same time as Premiere was released and Hoth was released. So
the two-player sets were the two-player games, or in those kind of square boxes.
Yeah,
a lot of them floating around. Everyone has a Vader that they think is valuable, but it's like the whiteboard of Vader that is, it's 1 trillion copies floating around the United States.
Yeah, there's a couple different variations of Vader in Japanese. So, but that's really it. It's just those three like core sets, if you will, plus the two supplemental products. And Decipher outsourced to a company called Takara, which is a Japanese toy manufacturer. And they were the ones that coordinated the printing of the cards with Cartamundi in Belgium. And they only really did it for a couple of years, not even a couple of years, like one full year.
18 months, it sounds like, right?
Right. And that's it. There was nothing else other than those three sets. And part of the reason that there really wasn't those three sets is they didn't sell well in Japan. And that's because Premiere in 1995 and Christmas of 95, when it launched in English, was also released in Japan. And A New Hope, when it came out in April of 1996, was also released in 1996.
So in English, you mean?
In English. So by the time Premiere in Japanese was getting released, we were releasing Dagobah in English. So then when A New Hope was getting released, it was Cloud City. And when Hoth was getting released, it was Jabba's Palace.
Which is just like the meta had changed and had gotten so much more interesting.
Yeah.
Right?
And by the time, like if you're a Japanese player and all your cards are in English, you have an understanding of English. You understand the game terms in English. You're playing in English. You're reading everything in English. And, so why would you go back and instead of buying Cloud City as the new expansion or Jabba's Palace as the new expansion, go back and buy Premiere? You already have maybe Premiere. You might want some Vaders or something because they're hard to pull. But like, you wouldn't go back and buy A New Hope. Right?
No, I mean, Premiere is literally the worst pulls. Like besides Vader and Luke, it's like so grim.
Right. Yeah. Nobody wants to pull Premiere anyway, or A New Hope. So it just didn't really sell that well, to be honest with you, in Japan, because the Japanese players wanted English cards. And then on top of that, they went to an outsourced professional translation company to do the translation, which the localization of Japanese was just really hard to do. To do game terms, to do like lore, and like there's like just like weird corner cases where they did like literal translations. So if you think of A New Hope, there's the card Danik Jericho, and he like his game text is like, if he wins a battle, you can spend 1 force to eat the soup of some character, and it's like literally translated like that. So it's like if you're Japanese, you're reading this card and you're like, this makes no sense, right? Or there's just like meta things like Dr. Evison, he operates on a character, and it's like quoted like in quotation marks, like operates, right? And that's because on a meta level, we as players know that a doctor would operate on a patient who's hurt.
Yeah, and he's like kind of a crooked
like,
doctor, right? Like he's not
he's
like
also
a
like a
reputable
serial killer who has a death mark on 10 systems or whatever, right? And so like we get it from like a meta level of like Star Wars and like real life. But when you try to translate that literally, it just doesn't make any sense. And you're just like reading this card and you're like, this is the most bizarre card. Like, why? Right? So the translations were really kind of off. You know, and English is a much more robust language than Japanese. So we can say things in different ways where you can't do that in Japanese. So there's like just reading the cards, you're just like, this game just doesn't make any sense. So between that and the fact that there were new sets coming out of new actual cards, not essentially reprints of stuff that you would have already had, it didn't sell well. So Takara decided to end the relationship with printing Japanese cards. And they actually lost the license to print cards too.
So this is in like 97, 97,
98. They 98. Lost the license to a rival called Tomy, who ended up being the ones that printed Young Jedi. So, yeah, I mean, there really wasn't that much as far as product that was released. Takara was licensed from the start in 1995 to produce things. So they produced all English packs. Now, at the factory in Belgium, in Cartamundi, all Japanese product is actually a second run, a second printing. So if you can see, this is a pack of Endor. They have this sticker on the back. Now, it's otherwise just a regular pack of English Endor. So Premier through Endor and all supplemental products got an extra printing. And in Cartamundi, they had to put a sticker on all of them because the UPC code on the back, Japanese computers at that time couldn't read the UPC code that regular packs use. So
Andy, I just want to jump in and say I am so glad that your brain exists to just share this information with the rest of the world.
Sure.
This is just something that I think a lot of people, you know, you have to go in a really deep click hole to find this information. So I really
exactly. So Cartamundi would print all of essentially a second run of everything and label them at the Cartamundi factory, box them up, and ship them in Japanese shipping container like cases, and then send them to Japan to be resold. So everything Premier through Endor exists. There's some supplemental products like I've just never seen. EPP, Enhanced Cloud City, revised A New Hope, Hoth, first anthology, second anthology. I'm sure they're there, but it's just so rare to find those things that I don't know if they exist. So
let's actually, I think the rarity thing is because I one of the big conversation points I think in the community right now is these like very like eye-popping auctions you see on eBay for a couple, couple rares. And so, obviously within that, like with the first three sets, you still have R1s and R2s, right? So one rare versus two rares on a sheet. So that's already going to make it more difficult. But maybe you can kind of talk about why certain, it seems Hoth Dark Side rare is a little more, valuable. And some of these, I think there's also just this weird heyday of everybody's dusting off their stuff. It's like, hold on, I got a Stormtrooper here. Is this valuable? Right.
Yeah. No, so rare ones are still going to be pretty valuable. They released Premier with Premier Japanese in April of '97 with a semi-normal print run for what you would have expected back in the mid '90s for a CCG on a foreign market. Probably less than whatever they would have been doing for Magic at that time.
But it wasn't massively underprinted.
It wasn't massively underprinted, but like any Premier, like there's just so hard to pull specific rare ones like Vaders or Lukes or Millennium Falcons or something. So there's just not that many of those. They upped the printing for A New Hope. So A New Hope got like overprinted. And by that point, they realized that it wasn't selling well. So they, one, underprinted Hoth. And then on top of that, Hoth had a printing run error on the sheets, on the collation of the sheets, where dark side rares just were underprinted. So the sheets that come out have, if you actually go onto the collecting resources on the PC's website and you open up the collecting encyclopedia, you can see an uncut sheet of what English Hoth looks like, and a Japanese Hoth is going to kind of follow the same pattern. So there's actually 2 of every rare 1 and 4 of every rare 2 on a sheet, and then it gets cut, and the way it gets distributed normally in a box will make it so that there's like 1 per how many ever boxes for rare 1s and 2 rare 2s for how many ever boxes. Japanese Hoth had it where for every 1 dark side rare sheet, there were 3 Hoth light side rare sheets. So,
oh, interesting. So it's like almost the same ratio as like an AI or an alternative image, like, you know, like the 1 of 4, right?
Well, they were printed. So a sheet of Hoth is only light side or only dark side. There's no like mixing like you would see on like like on a regular sheet of say like Reflections 2, where you'll have light side and dark side rares like alternating. It's just light side or just dark side. And so when you think about that, so like let's say you take a General Veers, there's going to be 2 General Veers for every 6 Commander Luke Skywalkers. And then put that into a box or a case of cards, and you end up with the way it gets printed, you'll end up with 4 General Veers and doubling it, and 12 Commander Lukes, right? But then split out across all the rare 1s and all the rare 2s. If you open up a box of Hoth, it has 36 packs. That means that of the 36 packs, on average, you should end up with 9 dark side Hoth rares and 24 light side Hoth rares. And then of the 9 dark side Hoth, or 27 light side, 9 dark side. And then of the dark side, that gets split between rare 1s and rare 2s. There's 15 rare 1s. So in a box, you might get between 1 and 3 rare 1s, maybe.
This is just a collecting nightmare is what you're describing.
You're probably going to get 2 rare 1s out of a box. There's 15 rare 1s. So under perfect collation, you need between 7 and 8 boxes of Hoth to complete a set. And it might not happen, right?
So
and then later on, it compounded where dark side sheets ran out, and so there are boxes of Hoth that are 36 light side rares. They don't have any dark side rares in them.
Interesting. This is helping inform why I believe it was Meteor Strike is this dark side rare that sold for $1,700, and it's random card, right? It's just a red card. It's not sexy. It's not General Veers
Sure.
or Admiral Ozzel.
So yeah, and then most like a lot of people, most people's first introduction was through Reflections 2, which you could pull a rare, but it was so unlikely that you would. It was mostly like random commons and uncommons. So really, the only way to get the cards was to open them out of packs of Hoth, which was underprinted already. They weren't really readily available in the U.S., so you really had to import them from Japan. Decipher did sell them at like the summer conventions in like 1999 and 2000, but they had to buy them retail off Takara and kind of ran out after a while.
Okay.
And then, you know, when the license ended, you know, or when you opened up a pack, you're like Meteor Impact, nobody plays this card. I mean, the card's literally unplayable today still. Like, the card is just garbage. Same with High Anxiety or Weapon Malfunction or Frozen Dinner. Like, none of these cards are playable. But
They're not good or even really interesting. You know, like General Veers, like there's at least fan value. Like, you know,
he's a main character, like, you know, character, Ozzel or Blizzard 2 or Blizzard Scout 1 or Wampa Cave or something. Like, these cards were all playable.
Iconic, yeah, as well.
They're also iconic to that set. So, like, people saved them more than they saved random junk red cards. And when the license ended, people get rid of their collections or put them in a basement or a closet or an attic somewhere and forget about it. And 25 years later, they open up their old collection, and here's some random, you know, Japanese rare, which they're really hard to find anymore. Like, there's probably not very many complete sets of Hoth. I think I maybe like 8-10 people that have a complete set, and a couple of those people have multiple complete sets just because, you know, they bought them in 2006 when you could buy a set of Japanese Hoth for $600. But yeah, I mean, there's just not many out there.
This is something we've talked about before is, you know, there's not many out there, but the number of people, the hardcore collectors that are collecting, there's also not a lot of those folks. I mean, there's obviously, you know, maybe a couple dozen, you know, a couple hundred, but it's not.
That's all you really need is even a couple dozen people. Like, you can't find, like, you legitimately cannot find these cards.
So I think in our background here we have, I was just going to say in the background here, we have a box. I think you shared this picture of the Japanese Hoth, and this goes for like 10 grand or something, if you can find it.
Yeah. And, you know, sealed boxes of it just don't exist really that much anymore. I mean, you can't really find them. So yeah, you just end up with 10 or 12 people who want to have like a complete master set where they account for master set to be every card of every printing and every language. You need a Japanese Frozen Dinner or Japanese Meteor Strike to finish your set. And, you know, the kind of person who's going to go after that is going to be a completist. Like, they're just going to want to have it. And, you know, if it's $1,700 for that card, then it's $1,700 for that card.
So let's move forward to maybe the show and tell portion. So I think in our history, we're up to, you know, Hoth is done, but there are foil Japanese cards, and I see this question come up every day. I think this one is the biggest. You know, I have a Japanese Vader, so this is still a very valuable card, particularly in the plastic.
Yep.
But it is nowhere near as valuable as the Japanese Vader. So this came on the top of Reflection 2 cases. Yep. So the case was 6 boxes. This was a case topper. Whereas
an easy way to tell that you have the not super valuable one is the Premier Vader, actual non-foil Premier Vader, doesn't have a set icon. That has the Premier set icon, the premium set icon on it.
Yes, you're right, actually, on this side. And also it's shiny. But, but no, that's actually a good like Easter egg right there. So I think that comes up quite a bit. I will say that I got this from a Reflections 2 pack. This was, And this has been like the pride and joy of a collection for like years. And I just thought it was very cool. But so they did happen.
Not
And
often.
yes, not often. I think I opened many boxes of Reflections too, because that's how I spent all of my money as a kid. But let's move forward. So there's foils. And I think they first came about in Reflections 2. So as a reminder, foils are only in Endor Reflections 1, 2, and 3, and then randomly tournament foils. So those are the only instances you're going to find these Japanese foils is going to be in Reflections 2 and 3. And I think each of them had maybe 4 or 5 Japanese
I think there's like 15 or 16 total across all sets that are foil.
So I have just some show and tell stuff here. So this was one from Reflections 2. This is a little Easter egg. So this card came in the Hoth 2-player, except it was white border. So they reprinted this in Japanese and black border. And this is the counterpart to that, also in the set. This is from Reflections 3 here. So this is a Premier card that's obviously not Japanese, or I'm sorry, not from Premier, from Reflections 3. And then, do you want to explain why this card is special, or why it's interesting? It's not special. It's like $5, right? But it's interesting.
Yeah, actually the non-foil whiteboard one's more interesting, but that's from a Jedi pack, and they reprinted it in the Hoth 2-player set. So it's the only card that's in Japanese that was not in a main set that was reprinted, and then they reprinted it again as a foil in Reflections 2 or Reflections 3. I can't remember which one. And so yeah, that Leia is kind of unique. It's not printed as much as other cards. It's actually harder to get than, especially in the white border 2-player set, than anything else. So yeah, just like they chose a lot of rare ones, kind of cards that were playable but harder to find, like Circle is Now Complete, Vader's Saber, Obi-Wan, Anakin's Saber, Trample, Grand Moff Tarkin, Death Star. So like kind of at that time, things that you would have seen in like more competitive decks, as well as things that were like rare one or like really oddball stuff like Imperial Walker and Rebel Snow.
I always thought of it kind of as like fan service, where it's just that they were doing this kind of like for folks to splash up their decks, right? You want to run a Grand Moff Tarkin, everybody knows his text, throw in the Japanese version. It's just a little fun. It's shiny. That's kind of how I thought of these cards as I pulled them, because they were all iconic-ish cards, like Trample, right? It's random, but it's also used in a bunch of decks to squish, characters.
Recover spies, yeah. Exactly. So yeah, that's kind of a brief overview of Japanese cards. There's, some really expensive stuff. Most things that people are going to find are going to be the random commons and uncommons that they pulled out of Reflections 2 packs that really don't have much more value than their English counterparts. Maybe an uncommon here or there might be a couple more dollars, an Imperial class Star Destroyer cents, specifically Hoth uncommons, talking about how dark side sheets were underrepresented. Light side uncommon sheets had the same problem.
Interesting.
So light side uncommons from Hoth are harder to get than dark side uncommons. And then dark side commons were much more printed than light side commons. So you'll find Echo docking, dark side docking bays and Imperial supplies and stuff like crazy. But, there's just a lot of weird printing collation errors with.
And this is all just a result of this is a company that was doing this all on the fly. This is sort of, I won't say this is early, CCG history as well. Like CCGs were still finding their way in the, mid 90s at this point. And there's a lot of like learning by doing, it's like, we're going to build the plane as we fly it kind of attitude happening in a lot of places.
Sure.
This is just an example of that, or just how confusing it is to have this like Japanese Vader that's part of Reflections 2, but there's no other, it doesn't make any sense now reflecting back 25 years ago, but I think in the moment it made a lot of sense. And it was like fans wanted a Japanese trample foil because it was cool, right? And sometimes that's the reason companies do it, is because of the fans.
Yeah.
Andy, I know you brought some fun stuff to show and tell. Do you want to show off some of the cool stuff you have? I know I said we we're going to keep it under 20 minutes, but I lied. I'm wrong.
Okay, no worries. So I showed off my indoor pack already. Here I have this is from Takara. So this is a Japanese player's guide. Inside of it has the text of all of the cards by set. So this is actually the errata text. So after they had all of the cards printed and people realized that the cards didn't make any sense, they went back through and had like fans or like tournament players or whatever, like basically like rewrite the cards. And then there's a corrected text version, which they printed in this. I actually got a text file of it, and about a year and a half ago, I posted it to the main Facebook Star Wars CCG group. So if you go into that group and click on files, you should be able to find the Word document with all of the corrected text for Japanese cards in it. But it also had some like rules and how to do location deployment and all the facts that Decipher had released through Hoth updated in here. But what I also think is the most interesting to me, I don't know how my camera works. So this is,
I tell you, it doesn't make any sense to me. I'm just squinting.
Sure. So this is the text of the Jedi packs, and then this is the text of Red Leader and Red One, Gold Leader and Gold One. So those were released in Japan in English, but not with Japanese text. But there's the official Japanese text of those, whatever it is, 15 cards between Jedi Pack and Red Leader and Red One, Gold Leader and Gold One. So, something kind of cool that they did that they don't really exist, but the official translation has been put out there.
It's sort of fascinating to think about, like, when they're printing A New Hope, what they're planning for Hoth, and I'm assuming they're also planning for Dagobah, right? Like there are decisions being made, like, and they don't know the carpet's going to get pulled after the next set. So I think I've heard rumors that there's like some Dagobah related. There's no Dagobah Japanese cards, but like maybe the printer. I can't remember actually. Maybe I'm.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about with this. This is an Endor pack. Dagobah was released just like every set. It's regular English packs of Dagobah with Takara information about the Dagobah set for like resale on there. So they're like Japanese Dagobah, there's like Japanese Cloud City, Japanese Jabba's Palace, but they're not like actually Japanese cards. They're for the Japanese market, but they're English cards.
Gotcha. One last question, and this is kind of a tangent. So this came out in Japanese. I understand there was plans to release the game in some other languages, including I think Spanish and German, but I'm not sure if that's correct completely.
Sure. So if you go, again, collecting resources on the PC's website and open up the collecting encyclopedia and scroll like way down, it's like a 200-page document. But if you scroll way down, there's like this information about other language support. There's a picture, and it's actually from the Decipher's website. So if you go onto the Wayback Machine on Internet Archive and go into like roughly around like 1997, 1998 and open up a whatever it is, skimmed copy of the website, and you can navigate to a certain spot where it talks about international releases. In 1998, they were supposed to release German, French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and I want to say it's either some other European language. Dutch, maybe Swedish. But because the Japanese, and so these were all outsourced. So there's a company called Queen's Games that was supposed to do German. German was supposed to be the first of the European language releases, run by a company called Queen's Games out of Munich, I think. They they saw how poorly the Japanese translations were and how poor the Japanese sales were, and ended up pulling the contract with Decipher to not produce foreign language support for European languages, which is funny because that's my other thing that I brought because I knew we were going to probably touch on this. So this is the Premiere. If it's in your head, it's in your game or whatever that marketing campaign was. That's the only place the Premiere version of that marketing campaign is, and it was in Star Wars Insider magazine for German market, and it was in like issues like 9, 10, and 11, which were run on quarters. So it was first quarter, second quarter, third quarter of 1998. First quarter, issue like 8 has this like big spread about German. It's all in German, of course, and it's about like how to play the game, what they've released so far, what they're anticipating with the release schedule to be. And then it says like continued in issue 9, and then issue 9 it picks up with like how to play and like new release of like Dagobah in English, and like they interviewed like Michael Jacob, who was the, or whatever his name was, who was the like 1997 world champion from Germany. And they've got these ads about like premieres coming, premieres like gonna release in 1998, like get ready for German edition. And then you get to like episode, and then it says like continued in issue 11 or whatever like the next issue is, and you get to that issue and there's no talk of it. It just it doesn't exist. And that's because Queen's Games at that point pulled the contract to release it, and they just decided not to do anything further with it. So the article's incomplete, and so that ad only exists in 2 magazines, and we don't have German or any other language support.
It's once again reflecting back on is not a totally fair exercise, but Premiere is just such like it's a product that has aged well and terribly at the same time. Like the thought in 1998, after like the meta has evolved and changed, you're like, get excited for like a bunch of crap.
Jawas.
Like a bunch of stuff that you're not going to be able to use. And like it almost would have made more sense, like start with special edition or something, right? Like, because that was like, I will argue this, like special edition is what Premiere should have been, or really,
Star Wars 1.5.
Yeah, right. Or I think they would have done a 2.0 like they did with Star Trek if they hadn't lost a license and whatever. All of that is what it is. But it's just funny to think of like trying to get people hyped up for like Premiere 3 years after it's been out. And, you know, Premiere is iconic in many ways, but it's also like everybody at that point is like Premiere's clunky, right?
Right. We've played with Premiere cards for 3 years now. I'm on to the next thing. So
yeah, and
yeah, they
wasn't errated. It wasn't. It didn't really make sense.
So yeah, because of poor performance of Japanese sales and the reception of Japanese cards in Japan, we don't have German, Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, and whatever other language they were going to do. So.
It's funny because I also do Lord of the Rings TCG, and they did do just a massive number of languages.
Yeah.
And like the drop off points are so random. Like the first set in Lord of the Rings they did in Chinese, and that's the only one they did in Chinese. So just a big collector's item is like a foil ring in Chinese, right? Like that's like the big chase items because it's just so random, right?
Sure.
But that just goes to show like these are business decisions at the end of the day, and they're not decisions that are made for collectors to reflect back behind like 25 years later. I'm like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah, no, but it really affects the collector's market 25 years later. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And if you know any Chinese Mandarin, I should say, rings of power, I'm in the market. I'm not really. I don't have the money for it. But well, Andy, thanks so much for staying up late at our time. Whenever people watch this, it probably won't be night. But thanks for staying up late and chatting with me.
Sure.
And I'm going to be coming back to you, I think, for a series that I haven't even told you about, but perhaps we will exchange deck ideas.
All right. Sounds good.
I'll bring a deck and you can bring a deck and we can kind of workshop how we would improve it. I think that'd be fun for folks.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for having me on. It was a fun talk. And if anybody wants to talk more about Japanese cards or anything like that, just hit me up on social media or leave a comment below, and make sure you subscribe to Matt's channel here.
Thanks, Andy. All right. See you, everybody.
Bye.